I'm like Boswell. I get to write about great people, but I don't mix myself up with the people I write about. The people I write about, they're smart, but as you know from this table, you've met a lot of smart people, and a lot of them don't amount to anything. They're a dime a dozen. What matters is being innovative, creative, imaginative. And so when I write usually about people who have been innovators, whether it be Steve Jobs or Jennifer Doudna or Leonardo da Vinci or Einstein. They think different. They think out of the box. Elon Musk in that category.
America is at an interesting moment. We are one quarter through the 21st century, and in 2026 celebrate our 250th birthday. I'm asking a series of extraordinary Americans, many without fame or fortune, and coming from experience and poetry, to take the temperature of America in 2026. What is the American idea? What do we stand for? What values do we need to remind ourselves? How is this country doing politically, economically, culturally, and as a force for good around the world? Walter Isaacson has served as one of America's great interpreters of ideas, leadership, creativity, and power. He has held senior leadership roles at some of the most influential institutions in American media and civic life. He was editor of Time, chairman and CEO of CNN, and president and CEO of the Aspen Institute. He is currently a professor of history at Tulane University. He is the author of 9 books, including biographies of Benjamin Franklin, Albert Einstein, Steve Jobs, Leonardo da Vinci, and Elon Musk. His newest book, The Greatest Sentence Ever Written, steps back from biography to focus on a single line from the Declaration of Independence. Here is the line: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." It is a sentence that has echoed across American history, invoked by Lincoln at Gettysburg, challenged by generations who saw its promise unfulfilled and returned to again at moments of national crisis. As America approaches its 250th birthday, Isaacson asks what that sentence still means and whether it can continue to bind a divided nation. Walter Isaacson is and has been many things: father, husband, teacher, Rhodes Scholar, Harvard graduate, TV commentator, journalist, editor, writer, son of New Orleans, CEO, and yes, biographer, chosen by the famous when they want their story told. He has been described as a connection between power and ideas, science and humanities, the past and the future, creators and consumers. I'm very pleased to welcome Walter Isaacson. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you. It's been so many years, so many decades. We've been either at this table or virtually at this table. I thank you for everything, Charlie.
Well, as I was thinking about you over the last several days and putting this conversation together, I just thought of so many moments. And so I call you my friend, and I am indeed fortunate.
If people want to amuse themselves, they can look on YouTube for the interview you did when I did Henry Kissinger, which must have been 40 years ago.
The first biography.
We haven't changed it all, although I had sort of longish, slightly blonde hair, and you look just the same.
Oh, well, some would say no. The mirror may say no. Tell me why this. Did you seek this book or this book seek you?
I will tell you the broad story, but I'm going to give you a little story that you would particularly appreciate. The broad story is that we were entering the 250th of this country. I can remember after going through Vietnam, Watergate, the riots, the assassinations of Kennedys and Kings, somehow we healed and came together for the bicentennial. And Gerald Ford did that. I wanted to, and I think there are other writers you're going to interview and people like John Meacham and others who are saying we ought to go back to our history for our 250th and all just rally around the values, some of them unfulfilled, that were the founding of this nation, so we can get rid of some of the poison. But let me tell you a real quick story about somebody you know and we lost this year. That's Leonard Lauder, who helped endow the professorship I have at Tulane, was an old friend of yours and mine. And about 3 years ago, he said, I want you to write a pamphlet about democracy the way that Thomas Paine did, on common sense, because we need to protect democracy for our 250th. And I said, okay, Leonard, I'll write something, but I don't know that people do pamphlets these days. Maybe I'll do a podcast or maybe. Then he said, no, I want you to do a pamphlet. I kind of forgot about it. Then I decided to write this as a cover story for a story for the Atlantic magazine. But my agent, who you also know, Amanda Urban, went to Simon Schuster and said, this is a small book. It's the same length as Thomas Paine's Common Sense that in 1776 helped start the revolution. Why don't we publish it as a short book? They said yes. We had a meeting, came out of it, and I called Leonard on his cell phone from Rockefeller Center, right in front of the Simon Schuster building. And he answered his cell phone, and it was kind of weak, but I said, I'm now going to do this pamphlet. And we talked about the values, and then he handed the phone to somebody, and the call ended. That was on a Wednesday. He died that Saturday. So the first words in the book are for Leonard Lauder.
He was a friend, as you know, and a friend to many New Yorkers because he, among other things, running a great corporation, amassed a great art collection and loved history.
Yep.
Let me talk about the Declaration of Independence. I mean, how was it written? Because we're talking about a sentence, but you described the kind of editing process that went in the greatest sentence ever written. But was the Declaration of Independence written that way?
Yes. In June of 1776, when the Continental Congress is about to decide to vote in favor of separation from England, they appoint a committee to do a declaration explaining why. It may have been the last time Congress appointed a really great committee, but the core members of it were Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and John Adams. And they met on the second floor of an apartment in Market Street near Independence Hall that Jefferson had written. And they went through 5 drafts. Now, as an old editor, people don't usually like editors. They're always saying how bad the editors are. But Thomas Jefferson loved the edits that Benjamin Franklin made, and also John Adams. And so the book I do has as its overleaf the first draft, where you see Benjamin Franklin's pen and John Adams's pen. And I go through the edits they made on this particular sentence. For example, real quick, Jefferson's draft begins, we hold these truths to be sacred. And you see the black printer's pen of a Ben Franklin crossing it out and saying self-evident. He was saying we're creating a new type of nation in which our rights come from rationality, not from the dogma of religion. But then it goes on to invoke the Creator. It says they're endowed with inalienable rights. And John Adams writes in, they're endowed by the Creator. And so you see, just in the half of the editing of half the sentence, the role, them balancing. They were very good at balance, the role of divine providence and the role of rationality. So I wanted to show, even in their crafting of that sentence, how they didn't make it all or nothing. They didn't say we're a religious nation or we're non-religious. They said it's a balance between rationality and religion.
Does it come from the Enlightenment or philosophy?
Well, it comes from the Enlightenment, and all 3 of the major drafters read John Locke. Thomas Hobbes. And these were the Enlightenment thinkers. And Jefferson and Franklin become avatars of the Enlightenment in the early Republic, along with, people like Rousseau and Locke, Berkeley, later David Hume. And so the Enlightenment is very much based on rationality and reason. And it really derives from the influence of the scientific method on philosophy and thinking. Isaac Newton and others had come up with a notion of balancing of forces and equilibrium. And Franklin and Jefferson in particular were serious scientists. We think of Ben Franklin as a doddering old dude flying a kite in the rain, but those electricity experiments were the most important experiments in science of that decade or two. And so from science, they learn the scientific method, which is you have theories, you test them, then you modify your theories based on evidence. And that was what the Enlightenment and what they brought to the checks and balances that became the American Republic.
Tell me how they were different in terms of experience and attitude.
Well, there were a diverse, on the drafting committee, diverse types of thinking. Now, obviously, they were all white men, but Jefferson, I think, is 33. Franklin's in his 70s. They have different experiences, but they share a notion that they have to work together to collaborate. Southern states and northern states, very religious people like Thomas Jefferson, who were not Christian religious, in general. They were deists. They did not have a strong sense of Christianity. All of them got together to help create this nation.
And John Adams, enormously influenced by his wife.
Yes, but perhaps not enough so, because
yes,
you read the sentence, I'll give her credit for two things that John Adams failed at, and so did the other founders. You read that sentence and you stressed the phrase, all men are created equal.
I did.
When I was studying that sentence, I was thinking, when they say all men, do they mean that in general, like humankind, like the rights of man, or the way Plato would use it? No, they actually were speaking of men. And John Adams's wife, Abigail, writes a famous letter. You remember the great Cokie Roberts had a book by this title. Yeah, it was called Remember the Ladies. And Abigail writes to John Adams at the convention where they're doing the declaration, remember the ladies and don't deprive them of the rights the way, others did. And John Adams writes back, I cannot but laugh, he says. We're not going to give up our masculine prerogatives. So she was pushing them to make sure women were more included in the balance of the early republic. And likewise, she is very much against slavery. She's saying, how can you write are created equal when we have people owning slaves in the colony? Now, her husband, John Adams, was also against slavery. He was one of the minority at that convention who never owned slaves. And yet he responds to her saying, I agree with you, but this is too controversial to touch right now. And so when they write all men are created equal, they've excluded not only all the women, but they've excluded the 20% of the population, 500,000 people who were enslaved.
And that is the great contradiction for some of the founding fathers, because there were those who were prominent, like Washington and Jefferson, who had slaves.
Right. It's a contradiction at the heart of our founding, and it's a contradiction we still wrestle with today. But as you alluded to in the introduction, that sentence is not a description of America in 1776. That sentence is an aspirational sentence. It's a mission statement. And it basically says, this is what we're going to try to be. And it becomes a forcing mechanism. 7 years after they write the sentence, As you mentioned, Lincoln invokes it in Gettysburg. He's talking about the beginning of the nation. He's not talking about the Constitution. When he says 7 years ago, he says, a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. When the suffragettes and the others fighting for women's rights do their manifestos, they invoke that sentence. And Martin Luther King, when he's fighting for civil rights, he invokes that sentence. So that sentence may have been born in contradiction, may have been born as Willie Stark says in All the King's Men, it may have been born in sin, but it's a forcing mechanism that tries to make us live up to its ideals.
When you write these, I'm reminded, sometimes I would get calls from people that would say to me, so talking to all these people at your table, what are you taking away from it? What are you learning? So my question to you is, writing all these biographies and having one more time in this small book to consider the founding fathers, what has it given you in terms of what you want to pass on to future generations, either through your books or through your life?
Well, I'll do it through my books because I'm like Boswell. I get to write about great people, but I don't mix myself up with the people I write about. The people I write about, they're smart. But as you know from this table, you've met a lot of smart people, and a lot of them don't amount to anything. They're a dime a dozen. What matters is being innovative, creative, imaginative. And so when I write usually about people who have been innovators, whether it be Steve Jobs or Jennifer Doudna or Leonardo da Vinci or Einstein. They think different. They think out of the box. Elon Musk in that category. Now, one of the great innovations in human history was a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, or that all are created equal. All God's creatures are created equal. That was a pretty big innovation. And like most of the innovations I write about, it wasn't one person doing the innovation. Innovation was a team sport. The creativity was a collaborative effort. So I want people to take away from the fact, from my books, how is it that we can be a bit more innovative? As Steve Jobs would say, to think different. And how can we do that in a way that has the wisdom of a Ben Franklin, but also the brashness of a Steve Jobs?
Well, that reminds me of one thing that I think you have pointed out. It is that, and I'm asking to correct me if I'm wrong, it is that the sum of what drives greatness also has within it a flaw that you find in some of these great creators.
Well, you have to have a certain passion. You have to have what they sometimes, referring to Steve Jobs, but also to Elon Musk, call a reality distortion field. When people tell you something's impossible, you just will it away. And as Musk would say, you take what's impossible and make it merely a bit late, and you get it done. But if you're going to have that passion, you're also going to break some china. One reason I'm not up there in the category with the innovators I write about is I'm a little bit too averse to breaking china. I'm too eager to try to show empathy and have people like me, whereas a Steve Jobs and Elon Musk would point out that if you care too much about whether people like you, you're never going to get rockets into orbit. You're never going to bring us into an age of miracle products. And so I do think there's always a passion in great innovators, from Einstein and Leonardo to Jobs and Musk, and that can sometimes be manifest as a demon streak. And, we're used to in this day and age, not on shows like yours, but on cable TV shows or on social media, to have to make somebody a hero or a villain, black or white, yes or no in 140 characters. But people are complex. Jefferson is complex. Jefferson writes that sentence, and in that room with him, besides Franklin and Adams, is Robert Hemings, his 19-year-old enslaved valet whose younger sister will become the mother of Jefferson's children. Shakespeare teaches us how complex people are. They're not just heroes and villains. Even Shakespeare's greatest heroes, Henry V, have flaws. I mean, Henry V kills all the prisoners. And even the worst villains, Iago, Shylock, they have their backstories. So we have to understand Shakespeare more and social media less and say, yeah, there are dark strands in people of great passion. And we have to, whether they're Jefferson or Leonardo or Einstein, we have to take them as a whole.
Is curiosity and the passion to get it done what runs through all these people?
Yeah. At the end of my Leonardo da Vinci book, I actually do a little chapter on, okay, what were his attributes and how do they fit in with the other people I've written about? And number one, as you remember, because we've talked about it, was curiosity, pure curiosity for its own sake. In his notebook, Leonardo would make lists of things he was curious about, like how do they divert the canals in Milan, or walk on ice in Flanders, or do a bird's wings flap up faster or down faster when it takes off. And at one point he writes, what does the tongue of a woodpecker look like? I'm going, what are you doing? Do you get a woodpecker? No, but it's nothing. Who needs to know that? Well, Leonardo did, out of pure curiosity. Jennifer Doudna, she's puzzling over why do bacteria have clustered, repeated interspace sequences that they call CRISPRs now. It was just pure curiosity. But it turns out to be a good tool for editing genes and fighting viruses. So I think pure curiosity is step one. And the cool thing about pure curiosity is we can all have it. We're not going to be Einstein. We're not going to have that mental processing power. But every one of us, every morning and every hour of every day, can push ourselves to be more curious about the things around.
Does that suggest we're not born with it? It's something we acquire?
It's just the opposite. We're all born with curiosity. Every kid is infinitely curious. But you walk through an airport or you walk along the streets of, and you hear, kids asking great, weird, silly questions. And at some point, the mother or the father says, shut up and quit asking so many stupid questions. And then we get the curiosity beaten out of us. The goal is to retain our childlike curiosity or regain our childlike curiosity.
But did you, to your daughter, try to somehow inculcate curiosity in
Yeah,
her?
because I had already written some, about these things. I worked at Time Magazine. And the really wonderful thing about our age is that when I was young, I was always very curious, and my parents were just awesomely smart and good people. And we had the Encyclopedia Britannica. And I'd ask a question, and my dad would pull down the volume from the shelf and say, let's look it up. Well, nowadays, everybody has in their pocket something maybe 100,000 times more powerful than the Encyclopedia Britannica. And that's the whole internet. And so when I was growing up, I was quite happy for Betsy to be pushing the bounds of digital tools, always going down the rabbit holes on Wikipedia or researching things. And her curiosity is a joy to me.
You mentioned curiosity and you mentioned the internet, and I think instantly of artificial intelligence, a subject that you have spent some time because you know technology, you know the people of technology, not only Elon Musk, but many others, including the book that you wrote on Steve Jobs. Where do you think we are in terms of, have you evolved in your thinking about the potential and the dangers and risk of AI?
I'm an optimist on AI. I believe it's an astonishingly great tool, and I use it this morning. I'm using it all the time to help me research things. I'm also, weirdly enough, an optimist that AI will create more jobs than it destroys. It's going to be disruptive, but every new technology makes us more productive, and more productivity leads to greater resources and greater demand for things we didn't even dream we'd have a demand for, such as being on a YouTube video or podcast or show with you. Those things didn't exist. 50 years ago, you had to have, a television network. If I'm going to give you an example, I love writing biography. I teach at Tulane, of course, a seminar called The Writing of Biography. I also co-teach a course about artificial intelligence. I have gotten students from my course to come together, a few of them, and we've created a little company. I put the proceeds from my part of it back to the Tulane Scholarship Fund, but it's called Boswell and Company. And you can imagine what it is. You love Boswell, the biographer of Dr. Johnson. And what it does is it says to people, including Jim Barksdale, who you know, he's one of our clients, we will write your memoirs. We will write your biography. And so some of my Tulane students do the reporting and the interviewing. I do the editing. The AI can take all the documents and all the memos from somebody's long life, help process it, and we produce a book. Nowadays, there may be 2,000 people have the privilege of having their memoirs published or a book about them published. That should be 2 million people. And if there are 2 million people, there'll be companies like Boswell and Company that will allow people to say, hey, we'll pay you, write my biography, and everybody has a story worth telling. So that will be the new type of product that will create jobs, even for history majors. And who knows, there's probably 10,000 such examples of new jobs that'll be created. And by the way, if everybody has a story worth telling and they get Boswell and us to write the biography, it's just a good product for people. It'll make their lives more enriched.
I think this is a great idea. I mean, I
Charlie
really
Rose.
do. Well, I think it's a great idea because I think there's something to be said and to be learned in terms of looking at your life. I remember a trip that I took with my father to the family in North Carolina, the family graveyard. And he could stand in the midst of the graveyard and talk about every headstone and who that person was and what he meant and what she meant and what their life was about and how long they lived and what their contribution was. And I thought, this is so a rich experience.
That's great. And by the way, wouldn't it even be better if I had one of my students there doing that with him and letting him tell that tale, and had all the genealogy and all the letters, whatever that your family wanted to give. And we created that memoir for you to pass along. It's, Plato says the unexamined life is not worth living. Well, everybody should have the opportunity to tell their story and to examine their life. And I hope someday we'll be able to do it for, 1,000 people.
Let me talk about America and its 250th birthday, a subject we mentioned at the beginning. How are we doing politically, culturally, economically, and as a shining city on the hill?
Yes, John Winthrop of Plymouth Plantation, and we shall be a shining city upon a hill. And no, we're doing quite badly now for a couple of reasons. One is that we're totally polarized. We're about to have this 250th birthday, and we're in no mood to celebrate a birthday. It's like having to go into the holidays with your aunt from Bogalusa and your uncle from Tuscaloosa, and everybody's going to be fighting over things. So that's why I wanted to write this book, to say, let's remember our common values. Let's take some of the poison out of this system at the moment. But we have to look deeper, too, and say, why is there such polarization and resentment? Why is it that social media, which exacerbates this problem, has so many resentments it can play upon that it can enrage people and cause them to polarize on social media? And one of it, as I describe in this book, is that we used to have a common ground where everybody, it was like the commons in Boston or Cambridge, where everybody could graze their herds. And so there was accumulations of great wealth, but there were things we shared in common. We've lost a little bit about what do we share in commons. Secondly, when you lose that, you lose the American dream, which is that each new generation is going to do better than the last. If you were born in the decades when you and I were born, Charlie, in the 50s, let's say, you had an 80% chance of being more successful, doing better than your parents. Nowadays, it's less than a 50% chance. That means the American dream has been hollowed out. People don't think their kids are going to do better than they are, and the kids are resentful because of it. And likewise, we've hollowed out manufacturing. We've hollowed out good jobs and good wages. And so I understand why there's a lot of resentment in this country. And the way to get back to it is to regain the concept of common ground and the ideal of the American dream. And that's what this greatest sentence ever teaches us and what I write about.
Are we in risk? Is there a risk that we will lose our leadership in the world to some other country? I'm thinking obviously of China.
Yeah, obviously. I don't think I'm not a pessimist. I think America can certainly right itself, and it will right itself. We've gone through this before. We've gone through much worse before. We went through the Civil War. We went through, as I said, the late 60s with the assassinations and the riots and the Watergate and then Vietnam.
And we went through the Depression.
Went through the Depression and came out of it each time celebrating our 200th or 150th or whatever it need to be, which is why we need to celebrate our 250th. Even in the early 1950s, you had the McCarthy era. And it looked like, Senator Joe McCarthy and the communist hunts or whatever was going to drive our country. Einstein writes to his son saying, I've seen this before. I saw it when the Nazis came in. I saw it when the communists took over Europe. Then a few years later, President Eisenhower, Edward R. Murrow of CBS, they helped get rid of Joe McCarthy's power. And Einstein said, there's something great about America. It's democracy. It seems to have a gyroscope. It tends to right itself. Now, I'm not going to be in the habit of disagreeing with Einstein, but I'd caveat a bit. It doesn't really right itself. We have to right it. But I think there's a hunger in this nation to start righting our gyroscope.
But isn't that about leadership? And isn't that, in the end, great men and women make the difference?
Yes, and usually we can think of a leader that will come in on the horse and help save us. I'm not sure this time we can wait for the great leaders to do it. I think it's going to come from the ground up. It's going to come from in New Orleans, where we have a new mayor. My wife is on the transition committee for Helena Marino, and we're trying to figure out how do we bring the city together, people, deeply conservative and deeply progressive. How do we work together? And in places I go around this country, whether it's Chattanooga or Austin or Dallas or Memphis, there are all sorts of entrepreneurial people getting their act together and people who want a change in the poisoned atmosphere. John Meacham's doing it in Nashville and others. So I think there's a hunger for this. And in this case, instead of, as you say, we have leaders and we'll follow them, I think it's us who's going to have to do it, and the people who want to be our leaders will have to follow our desires.
The question also is, it seems to me, what values do we need to be reminded of?
Why I picked this sentence. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. They're endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
That's what makes it the greatest sentence ever written.
Greatest sentence ever written. That's why I did this little book about it. And it's because if you parse that sentence, and we earlier on parsed, why did they say truths that are self-evident, and then as opposed to sacred, but also nod that the Creator and divine providence has a role in our creation. But the sentence talks about the common ground we share and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's not just some empty phrase that Jefferson made up. It derives from John Locke. It derives from the Second Treatise on Government. It derives from George Mason and others writing a month earlier the Declaration of Rights in Virginia. So we have to say, what does it mean to have liberty and the pursuit of happiness? It means you have the freedom to have private property, but you also create common ground. So each new generation has an opportunity, however they were born, each person in each new generation, to fulfill the American dream. Those are the values that they signed on to in 1776. And 250 years later, we have to re-embrace those.
There is also the question, certainly coming out of this weekend and the previous week, of violence around the world, certainly in Australia, certainly in Hollywood, and certainly at Brown University. Is it somehow different in 2025 or in the 21st century than it was, or is it the same, just of a scale that is larger and we know more about it because of the informational tools we have?
I'm a little bit on the side of the latter. I've read Steven Pinker and others. We're not a more violent time. I mean, the 20th century was a horrendously violent century with 2 world wars, a Holocaust, assassinations, everything, riots. We are living in a time when we're very polarized politically, but that's not just America. I mean, you can look at the results in Chile this past week. Look at Marine Le Pen's rise in France, or Orban in Hungary, Geert Wilders off and on in Holland. People are resentful, and so we have that polarization. But, I've been writing about the late 1800s recently. We went through a lot of revolutions and wars back then, too. So I don't think this period is any worse than in human history. It's just that we have the tools to know about it better, and frankly, we have the tools to solve it better.
It is also said that the language, while we get many people scream at the notion of insults that is part of the contemporary political language, that was true also at the beginning of the country, and that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, maybe we use a few more F words than they would use, they're more polite. But
pamphleteers at that time were equivalent to what people are doing online.
And they were sometimes anonymous. And just like our social media people today who are bitter and provocative and outrageous, we've always had that. I think the pure anonymity on the internet is different from the anonymity that, say, Madison had when he was writing under the name of Publius, or Ben Franklin had writing under the name of Poor Richard, because they knew that people could figure out who they were. And nowadays you can be totally anonymous. I don't think that helps our discourse. I also think the algorithms of social media provide an incentive for people to be more and more outrageous, and for the companies, the social media companies, to drag users down a rabbit hole that makes them more and more enraged rather than more comfortable connecting with other people, which was the original promise of it. But if you look at, I don't know, John Adams putting Benjamin Franklin's grandson into jail under the Alien and Sedition Acts, and the type of scurrilous pamphleteering that happened to Thomas Jefferson, and by the way, some of the scurrilous things were true, it's not all that different from this time.
When you look at freedom of speech, how is it doing?
I think we've always had to right ourselves some. I've been incorrect at times, as Ben Franklin would say. I think it's always useful to have the humility to say, I was kind of wrong about that. For example, there's been a backlash against wokeness, the inability, during a period where there were just things you couldn't say and you got ostracized from polite society for saying it. And I was part of that. I said, okay, we ought not to do things that are offensive to different groups. I think in some ways, I was just reading a really good article, can't remember what it was, but this morning on, in some ways, how the excesses of cancel culture and censoring free speech led to a backlash. And backlashes are never very good either. And so now, whether it's the backlash against diversity and equity or the backlash against wokeism and political correctness, I think we always have to try to be like our founders, who I said were scientists who studied Newton. And so they realize you often have contending forces. And the goal is to put them in equilibrium, that you don't need absolutely untrammeled free speech for people to libel and bully and harass people. But you also don't need all sorts of strictures that cause people not to be able to express their opinions. We're not great at doing balances, but maybe in this moment, we're getting back to the pendulum as being a little bit more balanced.
When you think about universities today, and you teach at a great university, Tulane, what are you learning?
Football school, did you know that?
Yes.
People never thought so. You stole our quarterback and we beat.
Well, yeah, that's true. And by the way, we beat Virginia, which was a big upset, which has created for people who are deciding on bowls and other things some difficulties. But people are saying football at Duke
and at Tulane,
and at Tulane, yes. But tell me about the students that you teach.
I love Tulane, and the reason. I chose to teach at Tulane partly because I grew up in New Orleans. My parents went to Tulane. My grandparents went to Tulane. And, I love it. I think it's the engine that drives the city of New Orleans. It also draws from the creativity of New Orleans and the the diversity of New Orleans. I also think the students who go to Tulane are more creative than in some other places, and perhaps a little bit less arrogant and cocksure than somebody who, may have think that they aced it by getting into Caltech or, some other place. So I just adore my students.
Or received a Rhodes Scholarship.
Yeah, right. But yeah, the good thing about being from Louisiana is there's that diversity thing where they want to have geographic diversity on things like Rhodes. But that's why when I work with my students on writing biography, we talk about what monuments do you take down, which monuments do you leave up, and they're open-minded. And so when we create Boswell and Company, they're all interested in, let me figure out about other people and write the biography. So I find Tulane to be a constant source of energy and new ideas for me. It's a dynamo helping the city of New Orleans, but it also really has the best students.
You have been, as I mentioned, you have run things, Aspen, CNN. You have written things, all the biographies. You are a teacher. Is there something that you have always wanted to do that's on your list of things? I'm going to do this before I die.
Well, I'm not sure there are things too much on my bucket list now, but there are things that I did not get an opportunity to do. And I think back saying, well, maybe that would have been good to be perfectly self-aware about it. I would have loved to have gone into government at some point. There were times when it was possible I was going to be brought into a particular administration, but it happened, I don't know, just as I was about to be editor of Time. And so I decided not to, of course. And just as I was finishing Steve Jobs, I decided not to. But I missed the opportunity. I doubt now that I'm in my 70s, I'll have the opportunity. But I think it's important to have served in government. Likewise, if I could go back, maybe I would have done military service, but for kids who became, as I did, 18 years old after draft was finished, we didn't think of, okay, let's go in the military anyway. That's a path I didn't take, that if I could do it again. And I have a wonderful daughter, as you know, Betsy. If I had to rewind the clock, maybe I would have had, 10 children.
What would your wife say about that?
She'd be my former wife. I don't know. It would be bad. Actually, Kathy, Kathy, we've been married.
Yes, I do.
What is it? More than 40 years. We got it together.
Who have you wanted to write about that has not been possible?
Louis Armstrong. I have found it impossible, which was, I grew up on, Galvez and Napoleon in New Orleans, not too far from Perdido Street, where Louis Armstrong grew up. I played music. I once or twice heard Louis Armstrong play. I like playing jazz. And so one day I set out to do a biography of Louis Armstrong, and I spent maybe a year and a half, and I went up to Corona, Queens, where his archives are, and listened to all the tapes and talked to people who had played with him, and George Lewis had been, and I soon knew everything there was to know about Louis Armstrong, except for who he was. I couldn't figure out, was he really happy? What was that smile all about? Did he like?
But isn't that a reason to want to write?
I wanted to, but I couldn't crack the code. And someday I'm going to convince Wynton Marsalis, who I've, known his dad, known him, a hero of mine, Wynton.
Me too.
To say, Wynton, you got to do it with me together. I'll give you all the facts and you show me the music and we'll figure out Louis Armstrong.
Isn't that one of the exciting things about being Walter Isaacson, that you just learn new things?
I cannot believe that people pay me to be at Time magazine, where I could go to Eastern Europe when the Berlin Wall is falling, or I could write cover stories on, scientists and musicians and everything else, and that I can actually make a living writing biographies of interesting people. As you said, curiosity is the most basic of the talents I think you have to be creative. I'll never be the most creative person, but I have led a blessed life where I can make a living by being curious.
What books have influenced you?
Walker Percy's The Moviegoer, particularly, because it's about the search. I was growing up in, Louisiana, and used to go across Lake Pontchartrain from New Orleans to the Bogafalaya, and we'd hunt or try to fish or get turtles. And there was a girl our age named Anne, who was first cousin of my best friend. And we used to say, "What does your dad do, Anne? He's always sitting on the dock eating hogshead cheese and drinking bourbon." And she said, "Well, he's a writer." And I was about 10, 12. I didn't know he would be a writer. I knew you could be an engineer like my dad, or a fisherman, or maybe a doctor. And then at some point around then, The Moviegoer came out, and I read it. It's this awesome novel, but it's hard to figure out exactly what the message in it is, especially if you're 12 or 13 or 14 or 15. And I finally went to him. I said, "Uncle Walker," which is what we called Walker Percy in our kids. I said, "What are you trying to tell us? What's the message in that novel?" And he said, "Walter, there are two types of people come out of Louisiana, preachers and storytellers." He said, "For heaven's sake, be a storyteller. This world's got too many preachers." And, he taught me that the best way to convey moral lessons, the way, of course, the Bible does it with its great lead sentence, "In the beginning," is to do it through storytelling. And once every 2 years, I pick up The Moviegoer, and with its lilting phrases from "Yesterday I got a note from my aunt," to Lonnie dying at the end, and they're all figuring out whether he's going to go to heaven, it inspires me.
But storyteller is what you are. I mean,
I think that there was a great line. I heard it attributed to Arthur Haley, I'm not going to give him credit for it because it's not my line, but I put it on top, a card on top of on the wall above my computer.
Yes.
And I use it every time I get stuck in writing some part of a book. And the 6 words are the magic words, which are, let me tell you a story. So if I got to convey something, if I have to tell you at the beginning of this show, why did you write a book that's just a pamphlet like this? I'm sure I said at the beginning of the show, let me tell you a story. And I told you the story of Leonard Lauder and what he wanted to do. And I do think that if we could all try to convey our values by being storytellers rather than preachers, we need a few preachers in this world, but we need a whole lot more storytellers.
Well, Don Hewitt at 60 Minutes used to say, the success of 60 Minutes was 4 words, go tell a story.
Right. Maybe I should give Hewitt the credit instead of Arthur Haley.
Yeah. But back to books. You write books. Books influence people. What other than Walker Percy, other than Walker Percy and The Moviegoer, what's influenced you? What books have you do you say to those students at Tulane, this made a difference in my life, it may make a difference in yours?
Well, not surprisingly. I mean, I could try to be highfalutin and tell you the great literature
be honest.
I love. But to be honest, I love biographies.
Right.
And at the beginning of my biography seminar at Tulane, you got to read the first few pages of T. Harry Williams's biography of Huey Long, which, by the way, starts with telling you a story of Huey Long having to campaign in southern Louisiana. He's from upstate, which was Catholic. And they say, was Catholic down there? He says, well, just, that's fine. He tells them the story of when I was young, I used to have to hitch up my wagon and take my Protestant grandma to church, then come back, hitch up the wagon and take my Catholic, hitch up the mule to the wagon and take my Catholic grandma to mass. And the advisors say, Huey, we didn't know you had a Catholic grandma. And he said, hell, we didn't even have a mule. And it's a funny story. Yes. It makes you realize he's a liar, a vagabond, and a rogue, but a likable one. And I say, that's the way T. Harry Williams got into this, which he didn't say that Huey Long was a demagogue who lied, but was also charming and whatever. He said, let me tell you a story. Obviously, I love Boswell's Life of Johnson, which is why we picked the name Boswell for our company. And I love, if you want to get to literature, I often reread in different, not often, but once every few years in different translations, Don Quixote, because it just is about a guy who fantasizes, but he always has a lance strapped to his side and an old nag that he thinks is a great horse, ready to ride for an adventure. It's the same as Huckleberry Finn, people who go on the road and seek adventure. And that trope, from the Odyssey to Don Quixote to Huckleberry Finn, that to me is curiosity with a lance in your side, searching for either windmills to tilt at or stories to get off that make you want to get off the raft.
Is it fair to say that all the people that you have written about have been dreamers?
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to say as...
Well, don't be nice. I want to...
Yeah, I'm trying. Well, I'm thinking.
I'm looking for the truths of your life.
I'm trying to think about it. It's, as Hemingway said, the son, wouldn't it be pretty to think so? I look at Leonardo, and he's totally a fantasizer and a dreamer.
Exactly.
I look at Jennifer Doudna, and she's a very focused scientist, deeply curious, but really evidence-driven curiosity. So if I had to make the 12 qualities, I've already talked about curiosity. I'd say passion, many other things. I think focus. I'm not sure being a dreamer makes the top 12, even though...
Really?
Because, dreaming without execution is just hallucination.
Dreaming without
execution.
Yeah.
You got to be able to, not only dream of the microchip, but get Andy Grove to work by your side so that you get them produced.
Well, at the same time, though, I'm I would argue probably that execution without a sense of a dream will not get you to, it's sterile.
Yeah. I think you have to have a vision, and maybe that's what you mean by dream. And I think in the greatest sentence ever written about the Declaration, that's the vision statement. And so I do think all the people I've written about were driven by a vision of their mission. I guess I was reacting a bit to the word dream because it seems a bit dreamy.
Yes, it does. Is Donald Trump an accident of history, or does he represent a fundamental turn?
Well, he represents a fundamental thing that's happening in our society. He's not an accident. In fact, it's happening around the world. Nor is Marine Le Pen an accident, or the new leader in Chile, or Orban and others, because we went through an era of globalization and through an era of many types of policies that actually created great wealth and great growth, but left a lot of people behind and gutted the American dream. And Donald Trump doesn't exist because of Donald Trump. He exists because of us. I mean, because of the country was ready to send a message, and not a message I embraced, but I'm respectful and understanding that is not just some guy who came in and imposed this upon us. There was a deep sentiment in the United States that the American dream had been lost, that the meritocratic elite had screwed things up, that the intellectual media elite had looked down upon people and was condescending, and it had become too filled with dogmas. And we can say, well, that's a shame, but we also have to say, well, there's a odious smell of truth to some of that, meaning that what was a problem in this country. And I'm not saying that I'm not justifying it leading to Donald Trump, but I think the country ended up with Donald Trump because the people voted for Donald Trump.
Would you bet on America?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, look, even amidst all of this, what nation is far away in the vanguard of creating artificial intelligence, along with China? I mean, I get the fact that China's up there. We got a lot more companies and a lot more people, even my students creating biography writing companies or ways to do financial services using AI. There's a lot more creativity happening despite Washington, despite our politics. And whatever you may think of Elon Musk, 95% of the tonnage that went into orbit last year was done by the United States because it was SpaceX. China had less than 5%. So we do have entrepreneurship in America. We used to be a nation of risk takers. Now we've become a little bit more of a nation of regulators. It means we can't really build high-speed rail. When we have affordability problems, it's mainly one component is housing, but we can't really build housing well because there's, as you know from all your Ezra Kleins who've you read or talked to, we just are not able to either take risks or cut through red tape and other things. So I think the U.S. has to get back to allowing for a little bit more risk, to being able to get stuff done. But what other country would I bet on? I'm not betting on China. I think it's doing an amazing set of things. But the lack of freedom and the lack of liberty leads to a lack of creativity and to some extent, a lack of innovation. And by the way, it's not a place I would want to live. So I can't think of any other country I'd rather bet on.
What an appropriate way to close.
Happy birthday, America.
Happy birthday, America. The greatest sentence ever written, Walter Isaacson.
Can't wait to be back, Charlie. It's always good to see you.
Thank you so much. Pleasure. Have a wonderful holiday. Merry Christmas. Say hello to all my friends in New Orleans.
And we'll celebrate what I hope will be a happy new year.
Thank you. Charlie Rose Global Conversations are long-form dialogues with remarkable men and women about their lives and the ideas that define us, and those from science and technology that change us. I'm looking forward to a future with wisdom from lessons learned, meaningful courage, authentic humility, and God's grace. I hope you're enjoying the conversations. Hearing from you helps. Please like and subscribe if you would like to be notified of future guests. Criticism and suggested guests, topics, and events are appreciated. You can mail us at the address below, globalconversations2025@gmail.com. Join me, become a subscriber to Charlie Rose Global Conversations, and make it a better experience. Click this link to subscribe.